You're listening to the Archetype Effect, conversations redefining power, purpose and leadership for women and the coaches who guide them. I'm Ros Cardinal, leadership coach and creator of the Women's Leader Archetypes. Together we'll explore the real stories, the research and reflections that help women rise with clarity and authentic power. A few years ago, I was coaching a senior leader after an executive team meeting. She walked into the room, sat down, and before I could even ask how the meeting had gone, she said, "I think I blew it." I asked her what had happened. She said, "The CFO looked really annoyed." So I asked, "Did he challenge your recommendation?" "No." "Did anyone say your proposal wasn't good?" "No." "Did the meeting end badly?" "No." By this point I was curious. "So why do you think you blew it?" She sat quietly for a few seconds before she finally said, "I don't think he likes me anymore." Now here's what fascinated me. Not because she cared what people thought of her, most of us do. What fascinated me was this. She had walked out of a meeting where her recommendation had been accepted. Nobody had questioned her capability. The discussion had moved exactly as she had hoped. And yet the question occupying her mind had nothing to do with the quality of her thinking. It was, does he still like me? I've lost count of how many versions of that conversation I've had over the years. Sometimes it's, I think I came across too strongly. Sometimes it's, I probably should have spoken up, but I didn't want to upset anyone. Sometimes it's, I've been replaying that meeting all afternoon, wondering whether I said too much. Different words. The same underlying question. What do they think of me? Before we go any further, I want to say something that I think is really important. This isn't a conversation about women lacking confidence. It's not a conversation about women being too emotional. And it's certainly not a conversation about people-pleasing. We've explored those ideas in previous seasons. This is something different. Because the women asking me these questions are rarely the women who are struggling to do their jobs. They're experienced, they're capable, they're thoughtful, they're often the people everyone else turns to. They prepare thoroughly, they care deeply about doing good work. They're committed to making a difference. Which tells me this isn't a capability problem. So why do so many capable women leave important meetings wondering whether people like them? I don't think it's because there's something wrong with us. I think it's because we've been paying attention. Long before we ever became leaders, we were learning. We watched who was described as easy to work with. We noticed who was labelled difficult. We observed what happened when women challenged ideas. We noticed what happened when they didn't. Nobody sat us down and explained the rules. We simply watched. And like all human beings, we learned. After nearly 40 years of working inside organisations, I've come to believe that one of the most powerful teachers in our careers isn't our manager, it's observation. We're constantly watching what appears to be rewarded, constantly trying to work out, how do people succeed around here? And over time, we quietly built our own scorecard. Work hard, be capable, be collaborative, be someone people enjoy working with. Don't make life harder than it needs to be. It's not a written scorecard, it's one we've built from thousands of observations. And here's the interesting thing. I don't think that scorecard is wrong. Relationships matter. Being someone people enjoy working with matters. Likeability has value. The mistake isn't caring about it. The mistake is believing it's the whole competition. Imagine entering a decathlon. Nobody explains the rules, so you spend years becoming exceptional at the high jump. You train relentlessly. You become one of the best. Then, at the end of the competition, someone tells you, the judges were scoring 10 events. Would that make the high jump unimportant? Well, of course not. You need it. You just can't win the decathlon by excelling at one event. And I wonder if that's what's happening for many women in leadership. Many of us have spent years consciously training for one event because we believed it mattered most. Building relationships, being collaborative, being someone people enjoy working with. Those things absolutely matter. But what if our organisations have been evaluating a much broader competition all along? That's what I'd like us to explore today, because I think many women are working incredibly hard to improve one part of the picture, while the people making decisions about influence, opportunity and leadership are unconsciously looking at the whole picture. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. If you've recognised yourself in that story, I want to reassure you of something. This isn't happening because you're weak, or because you lack confidence, or because you're somehow more concerned with what people think than everyone else. I don't believe that's what's happening at all. I think you've simply been learning the rules of the game, just like the rest of us. Think about how we learn to succeed. Very rarely does someone sit us down and explain the unwritten rules. Instead, we watch. We notice who gets praised, who gets promoted, who gets invited into important conversations, who gets described as leadership material. And perhaps even more powerfully, we notice what happens to people who don't fit the mould. We notice the woman who speaks bluntly and is called abrasive. We notice the woman who confidently backs herself and is described as intimidating. We notice the woman who challenges a decision and somehow becomes hard work. Whether those labels are fair or not isn't the point. The point is, we notice them. And human beings are extraordinary pattern recognition machines. We draw conclusions, often without even realising we're doing it. I remember working with an executive team several years ago. There was one woman on the team who was exceptionally capable. She was respected. She delivered outstanding work. People trusted her expertise. Yet every time we met, I'd watch her soften almost every recommendation. She'd say things like, "This is probably a silly idea," or "I'm not sure what everyone else thinks, but perhaps," or "We don't have to do it this way." Eventually, during a coaching session, I asked her, "Why do you keep apologising for ideas that turn out to be right?" She looked genuinely surprised. She hadn't even realised she was doing it. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I don't want people to think I'm arrogant. Not, I don't want to be wrong. Not, I don't understand the business." She was worried about how confidence might change the way people perceived her. Now, before we judge that response, let's remember something. She's responding to a lifetime of observation. She's watched other women. She's noticed the reactions. She's trying to navigate the environment as intelligently as she can. In many ways, it's an incredibly rational strategy. If you believe your success depends on maintaining approval, of course you'll protect it. But here's the question I've found myself asking more and more over the years. What if approval isn't the only thing being evaluated? What if it's not even the primary thing? Imagine that decathlon again. If I genuinely believed the judges only cared about the high jump, I'd be foolish not to spend all my time training there. The problem isn't the training. The problem is the assumption. Because if the judges are actually scoring 10 different events, my strategy, while it's perfectly logical, is incomplete. And I wonder if that's exactly what happens in leadership. Women have been given one scorecard. Or perhaps more accurately, we've built one from years of careful observation. Meanwhile, organisations are often making decisions using a much broader one. Not because relationships don't matter, because they absolutely do, but because leadership is being evaluated across many dimensions simultaneously. I think this explains something that has puzzled many women. They work incredibly hard. They build great relationships. People genuinely like them. Yet someone else is promoted. Someone else gets a stretch assignment. Someone else is invited into the strategic conversation. It can feel deeply confusing because by the scorecard you've been using, you've done everything right. And that's why I think this conversation matters so much, because I don't want women to stop valuing relationships. I'd hate that. Relationships are one of the greatest strengths women bring to leadership. What I do want is for us to realise that we've been competing in a decathlon, not a high jump. And once you know that, you can start training for the whole competition. So the obvious question becomes, what exactly are the other 9 events? Because I think that's where the hidden rule really begins. So let's come back to our decathlon. If likability is only one event, what are the others? I think one of the reasons this is so difficult is because organisations don't publish the judging criteria. There's no document that says, here's exactly how we'll decide who gets the next opportunity. Instead, decisions are made in conversations. And over the years, I've had the privilege of sitting in hundreds of those conversations. Promotion discussions, talent reviews, succession planning, project allocation meetings. The conversations where leaders ask, who's ready? And you know what's fascinating? In all those years, I've never once heard someone say, let's give her the role because everybody likes her. Never. What I've heard sounds very different. She has good judgment. She sees the bigger picture. She'll handle the complexity. I'd trust her with a client. People listen when she speaks. She's commercially astute. She asks great questions. She stays calm under pressure. She's dependable. She's ready. Now, does likability matter? Absolutely. Nobody wants to work with someone who damages relationships or creates unnecessary conflict. But that's the point. Likability isn't absent from these conversations. It's simply one part of a much bigger picture. One event in a decathlon, not the whole competition. I think this is where many capable women unintentionally disadvantage themselves. Not because they aren't demonstrating those other qualities. Most of them are. The problem is what happens afterwards. They leave the meeting asking themselves one question. Did they like me? Meanwhile, everyone else has been unconsciously considering 10. I often wonder how different our careers might feel if we simply changed the questions we asked ourselves. Imagine walking out of that same executive meeting and instead of asking, did they like me? You asked, what did they learn about me as a leader? Did they see my judgment? Did they see how I approached a complex problem? Did they see that I could think strategically? Did they see that I listened before responding? Did they see that I stayed calm when challenged? Did they see someone they could trust with something bigger? Those are very different questions because they're not questions about approval. They're questions about leadership. I remember asking one executive a question during a coaching session. When your name comes up in a leadership meeting and you're not in the room, what do you hope people say? She smiled awkwardly and said, hopefully something nice. I smiled back and said, maybe, but let's imagine they're deciding who should lead the organisation's biggest transformation project. Do you really think the conversation starts with whether you're nice? She stopped, thought for a moment, and then quietly said, probably not. Exactly. The conversation probably sounds more like this. Can she lead this? Will people trust her? Can she navigate the politics? Will she make good decisions? Can she handle the pressure? Is she ready? That single conversation completely changed the way she evaluated herself after meetings. Not because she stopped valuing relationships, but because she realised she'd been measuring herself against an incomplete scorecard. I think that's one of the hidden rules of work. People aren't forming a single impression of us. They're noticing patterns. Every meeting, every conversation, every decision, every difficult discussion, every promise we keep, every time we speak up, every time we stay silent. Every interaction adds another pattern. And over time, those patterns become the perception people hold of us as leaders. Not simply, do I like this person, but who is this person when the stakes are high? What can I rely on them for? Would I trust them with something bigger? That's the competition, not one event, the whole decathlon. And here's the wonderful thing. Once you realise that, you stop trying to be better at just one event. You begin developing the whole athlete. Once you understand that organisations are evaluating a much broader picture of leadership, the question becomes, what do I do differently? And interestingly, I don't think the answer is try harder, or become more confident, or even stop caring what people think. I don't think any of those are particularly helpful. I think the answer is much simpler. Start training for the whole competition. I remember working with a woman who'd just missed out on a significant promotion, and she was disappointed. But more than that, she was confused. She said, I don't understand. Everyone tells me I'm great to work with. And they did. She was. She built strong relationships. She was dependable. People trusted her. Nobody had a bad word to say about her. So we looked at the feedback together. Not one comment suggested she needed to become more likeable. Not one. Instead, the feedback sounded like this. We'd like to see more strategic thinking. We'd like to see broader organisational influence. We'd like to see her contributing more at an enterprise level. We'd like to see stronger commercial judgment. It struck me that she'd spent years polishing one part of her leadership, while the organisation was evaluating the whole picture. She wasn't failing. She was simply preparing for a different event. That coaching conversation changed something for both of us, because I realised she'd been asking herself the wrong questions after every important meeting. She'd leave thinking, I hope I came across well. I hope I didn't upset anyone. I hope they liked my presentation. Those questions aren't wrong, they're just incomplete. So together we created a different review. After every significant meeting, she asked herself 5 questions. Did I demonstrate good judgment? Did I contribute strategic thinking? Did I influence the conversation? Did I strengthen trust? Did I build the relationship? Notice that relationships are still there. They haven't disappeared. They're simply one part of the review instead of the entire review. A few months later, she laughed and said, It's amazing. I still care whether people like me, but it's no longer the only thing I care about. And I think that's the shift. Not replacing one scorecard with another, expanding it. One of the things I've learned over nearly 40 years is that leadership isn't built by managing impressions. It's built by creating repeated experiences. Think about the leaders you trust most. They probably never sat down and tried to create a personal brand. Instead, they consistently demonstrated something. Good judgment, reliability, curiosity, integrity, clear thinking, calm under pressure. Every interaction became another piece of evidence, another pattern. And over time, those patterns became perception. So perhaps before your next important meeting, don't ask yourself, how do I make a good impression? Instead ask, what evidence do I want people to leave this meeting with? Evidence that I think strategically, evidence that I listen well, evidence that I can navigate complexity, evidence that I make thoughtful decisions, evidence that I can hold different opinions respectfully, evidence that I'm someone people can trust with something bigger. Those are very different questions because they change what you pay attention to. I'd love you to try something this week. Choose one meeting, just one. Before you walk into the room, choose one leadership quality you'd like people to experience. Not hear you talk about, but experience. Then afterwards, don't ask, did they like me? Ask, what evidence did I give them today about the kind of leader I am? Because every meeting is another event in the decathlon. And every event is another opportunity to strengthen the whole athlete. I'd like to finish by coming back to where we started. To the woman who walked out of that executive meeting convinced she'd blown it because the CFO looked annoyed. A few months after that coaching session, she said something that made me smile. She said, I've stopped asking myself whether people like me. I asked her what she'd replaced it with. She said, now I ask myself, what did they learn about me as a leader today? One different question, but it changed everything. She prepared differently. She contributed differently. She reflected differently. And most importantly, she stopped giving all of her attention to one part of the picture. One of the things that makes me a little sad is how much energy I've watched talented women spend wondering whether they were liked. Not because relationships aren't important. They are. Some of the most rewarding moments in our careers happen because of relationships. But because I've seen women leave meetings replaying one sentence they said, while completely overlooking the quality of the thinking they contributed. I've seen women apologise for asking important questions when nobody else in the room thought an apology was necessary. I've seen women spend an entire weekend worrying about how they came across, while everyone else had already moved on to the next challenge. That's a lot of energy. Energy that could have been invested somewhere else. Perhaps that's the biggest shift I'd love you to take away from today's conversation. Not to stop caring about relationships, please don't. The world needs leaders who care. The world needs leaders who build trust, create connection, and bring people together. But perhaps it's time to become just as interested in the other qualities you're quietly developing every day. Your judgment, your thinking, your courage, your reliability, your ability to navigate complexity, your willingness to have conversations that matter. Because those qualities matter too, often far more than we give them credit for. If you remember nothing else from today's episode, I hope you remember this. Many women leave meetings wondering whether they were liked. The organisation leaves those same meetings with a clearer picture of the leader they believe they're seeing. Those are two very different scorecards. And once you understand that, you begin investing your attention differently. Thank you for spending this time with me. As always, I've created a companion field guide to help you explore today's hidden rule. It isn't a summary of this episode. It's an opportunity to reflect on the scorecard you've been using, the one your organisation may actually be using, and the leadership qualities you're demonstrating every day, whether you've been giving yourself credit for them or not. You'll find the download link in the show notes. And next time, we're going to build on today's conversation. Because once people begin to trust your judgment, something interesting starts to happen. Some people begin putting their own reputation behind yours. They recommend you. They advocate for you. They quietly open doors you may never even know existed. We're going to explore the hidden influence of sponsors, advocates, and champions, and why careers rarely grow through hard work alone. Until then, stay curious, because recognition changes everything. Thanks for joining me on the Archetype Effect. If this episode sparked an insight, share it with a woman who leads, or leave a review so more women can find these conversations. Until next time, lead with purpose and power that feels like you.